I became a carer for my mum because it was something I was happy to do and felt I had the skills to do it. My mum was a registered nurse and she had worked in rest homes, and she had made a choice that she didn't want to be in a rest home in her later life, and that ideally she would like to have stayed living with her family. So when Mum was in her 80s, she had been living with Dad in Wainuiomata. They'd lived there for 50 years, I think, and they were working together really well as an elderly couple. But then Dad unfortunately had a fall, and 3 weeks later he died, and which left Mum at home alone. And she didn't have a really good understanding of how much help Dad was giving her, and she chose to remain living at home alone, which was fine, and we supported her in that. But after 6 months it became apparent that it wasn't good. Her quality of life had deteriorated significantly. She wasn't eating very well, and she ended up in hospital. And as a consequence of that, the family decided that it was time that she needed to be given assistance and come and live with one of us. And there were 5 of us kids, and I seemed the most obvious choice because of my experience as an occupational therapist, and I worked in the elder health field. So I would have thought I had a good idea of what it was going to be like, but in reality it's different when you're actually doing it yourself. The whole family's schedule was circled around my mother's needs. She did take priority, and as well as that, your schedule and your family schedule is very reliant on, well, you have to accommodate the social services that are coming into the house, and you have to adjust things so that you can take your loved one to their appointments, medical appointments, and it's surprising how many of those there might be. So, I mean, there are the rheumatoid arthritis specialist. We're also having to go to the dentist quite frequently, GPs every month, and you just had to find the time to enable that to happen. Yeah. Any activities that we did as a family had to be structured so that my mum could be involved. So that sort of limits what you can do. It limits the amount of time you can go out because of her being tired. So for a couple of years she was the centre of the family, and I think you have to have a very supportive husband and children for that to happen. Positive aspects is that I've learnt a great deal about my mum's family history. I got to know her very intimately because you're with her a lot, and you're also getting involved in personal care activities, so you see someone at a very basic level, I suppose. When you're assisting someone with showering and dressing and toileting, you see someone from a slightly different angle than before. I learnt a heck of a lot about how resilient she was and how she dealt with difficult and painful situations. So, I got to know her as a very strong woman. I also got to see the side where she wasn't the mum I used to have because her memory was fading and she was dealing with chronic pain. So I saw a different side of her, but at the same time, it was just amazing to see how resilient she was. Yeah, and she moaned very little. Yeah, so it was, she's a bit of a role model, really. And my children got to live with their grandmother came to live with them for 2 years, which they wouldn't have had that before. So they really got to know their grandmother at a different level. Yeah.
So if you were to give any advice to other people that are considering taking on this role, what would you say?
I would say it's worthwhile really thinking about it, and that it could be a really good experience, that I think before they take on the role, they must realise that it is going to be a big part of their life, that they will lose sometimes, you know, that they've perhaps spent by themselves in interests and social activities, but I think it's still worth it, and you can sort of accommodate, you can still perhaps, if you're really clever, still continue with your interests and perhaps involve your parent as well. I think don't be afraid to ask for help, and when family members ask for help, accept it. Sometimes you have to, you know, someone, your sister or your brother might say, you know, what can I do? You might have to be really specific, because often they just don't know what to do and what will be helpful. So I would say things like, well, you could take mum to the doctor's this week, or you could take her shopping, you could take her out for a drive. So you might have to be quite specific in getting assistance from other people. One of the things that we learnt was that paid support isn't readily available, but don't limit yourself, don't sort of use that as a barrier. So mum, with her money, she paid for a recreational therapist to come and spend some time with her. Initially it was 3 afternoons a week, I think, for an hour and a half. I think later, sort of the prior to her passing, she was paying for someone to come and sit with her for 5 afternoons a week for an hour and a half. And that made a huge difference, because it meant mum could do things away from me, and she could, do her own thing, and she saw the recreational therapist as her friend, and it just gave her a quality of life which we couldn't give her the whole time. Yeah, so one of the reasons I said I would take mum into our house is because I thought I could maintain her quality of life, and that was my whole goal. It was towards the end of the second year that I was very aware that her quality of life was slipping. So that is when I did seek professional help to see if she could, if it was time for her to go into a rest home. And that was sort of just being worked out, and she had a fall, and she didn't make it to the rest home. She died from home. Yeah, but that was my goal. I think if you can't at least maintain your parents' quality of life, then maybe you should seriously think about whether you would be the best carer. I think it's really important that that you encourage your parent to remain as independent as possible, for them to do as much for themselves as possible. So don't sort of jump in and try and do everything quickly and fast, because that just doesn't do anything for their self-esteem. I think it's really important that you just maintain their independence and their abilities for as long as you can. As mum's abilities were declining, I still tried to encourage her to make decisions, and in the end it might have been just a choice, giving them 2 choices and letting them choose one. When it came to activities of daily living, if she couldn't participate in the whole task, then I would encourage her to participate in part of it, and towards the end it might be just doing the last step so that they finish the task and get that feeling of accomplishment. I think you need a sense of humour, and you can't be too tough on yourself when you get a bit short. Mum and I got on really well for the 2 years, but there were a couple of occasions where we lost it due to being tired or pain and that sort of things. And I don't think that's just human nature, and that's what happens in families, and I think you just have to accept that. Often when you're with your parent sort of 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, of course you're going to be the ones that gets the sharp tongue, where your brothers and sisters who aren't in that situation perhaps are looked on more favourably at times, and I think that can be a bit hard, but you just have to accept it.